in your opinion, what we can get for the future of socialism, what it would be look like, what's the best form of socialism?
I think what we're seeing is the use of the term socialism is going to go through a big change. Look, everything else is changing. There's no reason to be upset or worried if the concept of socialism is changing. The world economy is changing. The meaning of the United States in the world is changing. So let's go with socialism. Up until now, most conversations about socialism, whether they refer to Western Europe, the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and so on, refer to it in terms of the difference between private enterprise and state enterprise, unregulated markets or state-regulated markets. Capitalism is usually defined in terms of private enterprise, relatively free markets. Socialism is normally defined as government's regulation or government ownership on the one hand, and government regulated markets or government replacing the market with planning on the other side. That was a discussion starting in the late 19th century and dominating in the 20th century. So that when Russia and China and Cuba and North Vietnam and North Korea and so on, when they made their socialist revolutions, they either replaced or subordinated private enterprise and gave the government more or less dominating power to regulate, or even, as in the Soviet Union, to take it over. All right? I believe, and I'm just one kind of socialist among others, but in my opinion, those definitions of capitalism and socialism, which were very powerful, had enormous social consequences in the 19th and 20th century, are now no longer relevant. Why? There are many reasons, but perhaps the most important is that whether you have a government that is a government that is powerful economically, as in socialism, or you have a government that is much less powerful, as in capitalism, for the mass of the people, it doesn't make very much difference. The worker in a Soviet factory owned and operated by the government had pretty much similar experience to the worker in a private factory in Detroit or New York City or Buenos Aires or London or anywhere else. What socialists have been discovering in the last 10 or 20 years, when they had to face the crucial question, why did the Soviet Union collapse? Why did that kind of socialism not survive? As they began to ask and answer the question, they realized that socialism should not mean government versus private, that was a development that came out of the conditions in Europe at the end of the 19th century, worked in the 20th century, brought millions of people to socialism, so had very important results, good and bad, but that it could not continue because it was missing something. And the answer to what it is missing has now been found and will be what socialism means in the 21st century, the one we're in now. And here's how that works. It goes as follows. The old socialists, the ones who thought it was all about government regulation or government versus private, they didn't change the reality of the human relationships in production, in the factory, in the office, in the store. Socialism must mean the transformation of the workplace, not merely whether the owner is public or private, not merely whether the board of directors is private or a government office. There has to, whatever the importance of those things, there has to be fundamental change at the base of society, where the vast majority of people live and work. And when people went back to read Marx and to learn and rethink the socialist tradition, they found in Marx what they were looking for. And here's the answer. In capitalist production, you have a small group of people at the top. In private capitalism, it's the private owner, the major shareholders, if it's a corporation, the board of directors, the top officials, the CEO, and all of that. And they have all the basic decisions to make. They decide what will be produced. They decide what technology will be used. They decide where production will take place. And they decide what is done with the fruits of the output of the production, whether it's a factory, an office, or a store. The vast majority of people, the employee, not the employer, by the way, employers, depending on how you count, are between 1% and 3% of the population. Everybody else is an employee. The employees are excluded from deciding what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the product. This is the system of capitalism. It is a small change from how it was in feudalism, where you had the lord and the serf. And that in turn was a small change from how you had in slavery the master and the slave. Socialism is the negation, the rejection of all of those small ruler, massive rule. Socialism is the negation of master-slave, of lord-serf, and of employer-employee. What socialism must mean is the transformation of the workplace, factory, office, store, so that there are no employers and employees. The enterprise is to be run as a democratic community. Every person has one vote. Together we decide what we will produce, how we will produce, where we will produce, and what we will do with the product. That's socialism. And until you install that in an economic system, you don't have socialism in terms of its meaning in the 21st century. And what that means is that whatever you think of Sweden and Germany, of the People's Republic of China, of Cuba, of North Vietnam, and so on, the question we will ask of them, have you installed socialism inside the workplaces? If you have, then you are the 21st century version of socialism. If you haven't, then you are some other kind of socialism. We have no control over who calls what they do socialism. In my view, the Chinese have done extraordinary achievements, but they have not instituted what I've just described in their offices, their factories, and their stores. Maybe they will. Maybe they are en route to doing it, but it's not there yet, and it isn't elsewhere either. So for me, I believe that whatever happens in the struggle between the G7 and the BRICS, the demand for socialism, for a democratic community at the workplace, that demand will become real, will capture the spirit and thinking of the working class, and be seen by the working class as a way forward. Whether it happens in the United States or China is a secondary matter. This struggle for socialism will go on in this century across the world, just like the struggle for socialism defined state versus private swept the world in the 20th century.